Hello, my friends. What do you think is one of the most iconic superhero movies of all time? I'm gonna say, if you clicked on this video, you know my answer. It's X-Men from 2000, directed by Bryan Singer, starring Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Hugh Jackman, and some other people like Holly Berry and whoever played Scott and whoever played Jane and whoever played Mystique. So the reason I think that it's iconic is this is not the first X-Men movie. That was actually a TV movie from the early 90s called, I think, X Generation or something like that, which I've reviewed on the channel. And that's really, really wild, but it's not good. This movie, it has moments where it's not actually that good, and I'll talk about them in a moment, but it's full of such iconic performances. Like, you have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and yeah, I know he's probably too tall to play Wolverine, but it's not about exactly how you look, it's the attitude. And I think Hugh Jackman has this like perfect small man energy. Like, Wolverine is a ball of little rage, and Hugh Jackman really gives you that feeling. And there's times, I don't know how tall Hugh Jackman is, but there are times when the camera angle is showing somebody that's probably as tall as him, or Jackman is a little bit taller, and he's like crouching down. So he is making himself shorter. He's a short king. And then you have the two iconic roles of Magneto, played by Ian McKellen, and Dr. Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, and they're just such great actors that they are elevating this film. And I think it wasn't the first move. Actually, I was about to say I don't think that it was the first superhero movie where they spent a lot of their budget on big name stars. And the thing that came to my mind was the Batman movie from 1989. And Jack Nicholson, of course, was a huge star. But Michael Keaton, he was a huge star, but it was a huge risk to cast him. And now they just take like really, really great actors, really prestigious actors, and they throw them in the MCU and expect them to deliver miracles, like Michelle Pfeiffer. I don't know why I burped and said Michelle Pfeiffer, but you know, Michelle Pfeiffer in the Ant-Man trilogy, the last one. I think that she's in that one. Such an awful movie, and the fact that you have a great actress in it doesn't really elevate the movie at all. So the movie actually is pretty well written, and it's really well paced, and the motivation of the main bad guy is completely understandable and crystal clear. And that's the thing with the X-Men. You might think that the metaphor is a little heavy-handed, but there's literally a character who survived the Holocaust. So the fact that mutants might be rounded up is going to motivate him to do things. And the special effects are not always great, like the Senator Kelly like melting as a blob guy. It really shows the age of the CGI effects. But some of the practical effects are really good, like when Magneto, he's picking up the cars and dropping them because he has magnet powers. Really, really good. So I've watched the movie, I don't know, 2 or 3 times now in my life, and yeah, I think it's a movie that grows on you and is always entertaining no matter how many times you watch it. Because of the good things that I mentioned, but also because of some of the bad things. So let's talk about the bad things. Sometimes the writing is obscenely bad. Like when Storm says, you know what happens to toads? And she's doing this weird accent because Storm is not actually from America. I don't remember where she's from, but she's not from America. So she's doing this weird accent where she's like, I'm not going to do it, but she says like, do you know what happens to toads when they get struck by lightning? The same thing as everything else. And, you know, Toad gets zapped by lightning. And that brings me up to the next bad thing about the movie is Toad. Of all of the villains in the X-Men franchise that you could choose, you chose Toad? Like, Toad, oh, he's a Toad man. That's his power. And then he's like charging against Storm, and he does this really weird jig kind of thing, which I guess is supposed to be terrifying. He's a Toad man. And he's like, why won't you die? Like, dude, you have Toad powers and she has Storm powers. It's in her name. A Toad is not going to survive a storm. She doesn't even need to, like, strike you with lightning. It kind of reminds me of a 1970s horror movie that my cousin and I watched many years ago called Frogs. And I think I did a review for that for this channel. I don't remember. I watched it with my kids a few years ago, and it kind of holds up, but it's like really ridiculous. Basically, this really rich family, they poison their swamp, and then the animals in the swamp attack them and get vengeance. And then there's this one scene of this lady running away from toads, and the toads are just like, you know, hopping along. They're not even mutated or anything. They're just like normal toads. And she's like, ah, ah, you know. That's what Toad reminds me of, that movie. So that's kind of ridiculous. And I think generally the problem with the movie is that you have three characters that are really well developed. So Magneto and Dr. Xavier and Wolverine. And then you have characters that are not so well developed. And I think Storm is a good example of this. I don't think that there's ever been a good movie that deals with Storm's thing. But a lot of the other X-Men are also really kind of shallow. Like Scott's role in this film seems to be, that's Cyclops, seems to be just to be irritated with Logan. And Jane Grey, who Logan is falling for. Like, we don't actually see any kind of, I mean, Hugh Jackman does a good job of showing that he's attracted to Jane, but there's no build up to this. It's basically like Logan is in a coma, he wakes up, he tries to strangle her, and then he loves her. And that's basically it. There's no real development. And those are the only characters I think that are actually named, right? And as bad as it is for the X-Men, it's even worse for the villains. Because you have Toad, as I said, no development, just completely ridiculous. And then one of the other main villains is Sabretooth, and he's wearing these black contacts. He's got, like, you know, claws. He basically looks like an unkempt man with maybe some dental problems. But he growls. Like, why? Why does he need to growl? Maybe that's from the cartoon. I don't know. In a cartoon, it would make more sense. But in live action, no, it doesn't. Yeah, kind of ridiculous. And I think that they're setting up that Wolverine will discover that him and Sabretooth are brothers in a very bad movie that I will review for the channel later on. But yeah, the last thing I'd like to talk about is the following, which is there's always like a debate about what was the movie that made comic book movies so popular. And I have to say that comic book movies have always been my favorite genre of film, not just since the MCU. In fact, I didn't like a lot of the MCU stuff when it originally came out. I grew up on Superman, and then later Batman, and then later things like Kick-Ass. And I always like a superhero movie that deconstructs the genre, right? I really like those. Like Kick-Ass isn't a good example of something that deconstructs the genre. But I think X-Men is something that really shows the basic building blocks of the genre. This is what a superhero movie should be, and any kind of like new thing that you want to do has to sort of react to that template, you know. And I think even the things like that people kind of criticize now, like Wolverine says, "Oh, your uniforms look ridiculous," and Scott says, "Oh, would you prefer yellow latex?" You know, because that's actually Wolverine's costume in the comics. And now people say, "Oh, that's bad. That's not comic accurate or whatever." But I think that's part of the template to make a big comic book movie, you know, because you need to kind of get the normies involved. You get the normies involved, and then they kind of fall in love with the characters. They know about the characters. Maybe they go back to reading the comics, or they start reading the comics, and they're like, "Yeah, Wolverine, he's a short guy, dressed in yellow, claws," you know. And then you can make more comic accurate stories, and they did eventually. But I think one also, I said the claw thing, and I think one thing that they can't really do in a film like this is that they do really well in Logan is that if a guy comes up to you and he's fighting with these claws that come out of his hands, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be like a massive amount of gore. Guts are going to be falling everywhere. You know, it's not going to be PG rated. That's for sure. So it's kind of odd how Wolverine as a character has been in so many PG franchises, but he is, by his very nature, such a visceral kind of attacker, and very graphic results, I would say. All right, so if I was going to rate X-Men, I think that there are a few problems with it. And it's not my favorite superhero movie of all time. That's because I don't really like Well, I mean, it's not that I don't like X-Men. They're just not my favorite character. I think that Magneto is a very interesting character. I think Magneto is one of the better characters to come out of comics. Kind of like Superman or Batman, but he doesn't get a lot of credit for that. But yeah, so it's not my favorite comic universe, but it's enjoyable. And I can't imagine that anybody watching this video has never seen it. But if you've never seen it, please go and watch X-Men from 2000. And then you can watch the reboot, which is also really good. But I'll talk about that when I get there. All right. Thanks. Bye.